dietary guidelines which were launched in 1980, they got it wrong from the start. They didn't review any of the major clinical trials that had been done by the National Institutes of Health. So I'm talking like billions of dollars of trials on tens of thousands of people had been done. All of those were ignored. So what those trials said was saturated fats does not prevent heart disease. There had been almost no clinical trials on the low fat diet at the time, but they started with a diet that they basically inherited from the American Heart Association, which is very close to the government. But there was already a kind of a dogma about don't eat saturated fat, don't eat dietary cholesterol, eat a low fat diet that had already started with the American Heart Association in 1961. USDA just took all that on board. And there were scientists from the American Heart Association that deeply influenced that process, that were the major advisors for that, the generation of the guidelines. So they started off with the wrong diet. Why have they not been able to correct course is like a huge long story. I mean, we have gone to those committees with the science. I've had top scientists go and visit top officials at USDA and HHS. We've gotten Congress involved. And I don't want it to, I want to try to simplify it for your audience, but there are major forces working against change. So let's just start with like an easy and obvious one is just the resistance of bureaucracies to change. They're not change agents. That's not the way they're set up. They're meant to preserve the status quo. There's also the tremendous fear of flip-flopping on the public, right? You lose the public's trust. And to get something wrong of this magnitude, to say, hey, that low fat, low cholesterol diet we've been telling you would make you healthy has in fact made you not just not healthy, but probably made you sick and provoked the chronic disease epidemics. I mean, if you look at obesity in America, it was 9.6% of the population in 1960, 9.6%. So the dietary guidelines come along in 1980, sharp upward tick in obesity rates, which are now, I mean, I would say they're now probably at 50%. The latest number that was published by the government was from 2014. They have not given us a number since. In 2014, it was over 42%. So just imagine now, also, post lockdown, post epidemic, it's, I think, very likely it's close to 50%. But it was the guidelines that tick that upwards, and it's a very like sharp change, and that's one of the reasons is that the guidelines are hugely influential. They really, all federal food programs are mandated to follow the guidelines. So that's your school lunch programs, feeding programs for the elderly, women and infant children, hospital foods, and all that. But they're also downloaded as like the virtual gold standard to all healthcare professionals. So doctors, nurses, nutritionists, dietitians, all, that's their Bible. That's their North Star. So when you go to the doctor's office or any nutrition advice is coming from the guidelines. And just to review, if you're getting advice to eat more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean protein, lean non-fat dairy, vegetable oils, that's the guidelines. So you're getting the guidelines, and that's what I think most people believe is a healthy diet. But just going back to the question of why we can't change, so bureaucratic inertia, cognitive dissonance of being wrong, fear of losing the confidence of the public, which can be devastating to public agencies, as we've seen recently. Other forces, the food industry. The food industry, in the analysis that we did of the Dietary Guideline Committee in 2020, it's the only published systematic review of any committee. We found that 95% of committee members had a tie to food or pharma, and half the committee had 30 such ties or more. One of the committee members had 152 ties to food or pharma. So, I found out that more than 100 companies have partnerships with the direct office that oversees the guidelines at USDA. So and the USDA, their stakeholders are farmers, growers, but also Unilever, Nestle. I mean, those are the folks, those are the lobbyists that they're meeting with, the American Consumer Goods Association, the American Beverage Association. That's who their stakeholders are. So there's the opposition of the food industry. There's, and particularly the ultra processed food industry, as people like to call it, because they're the big organized giant multinational companies. It's not Joe Farmer who's going in there. It's the big multinational companies that are most often show up as influencing these expert committees that run the guidelines. And then there's the pharmaceutical industry. Their sweet spot um, model is it's chronic disease. Take 4 or 5 pills, as the average American does, every month for the rest of your life. By the time you're older, you're taking 9 or 10. I mean, that's a constant income stream for them. And you just like for them, people getting healthy through food is not the model that they benefit from. And then I can go on. The animal rights movement, which is quite powerful and has a lot of followers, they don't want people eating animal foods. The global climate movement also doesn't want people eating, especially eating meat, because they believe cows cause global warming. I don't know if I've ticked off all and then there's all the expert nutrition scientists at places like Harvard and Stanford and Johns Hopkins who also don't want to be wrong, so have a lot of cognitive dissonance, and as I've turned up in my reporting, have a ton of conflicts of interest and are getting funded by food companies. So yeah, those are a lot of obstacles to change.
Sina, we would be remiss if it right now at this point we didn't just kind of in a bit of satire or humor point out that what what Dr. Nina has just described, it's only in nutrition. It doesn't happen in any other sector of our nation, of our country. It only happens when we talk about nutrition. I just had to point that out just so we could have a moment of levity here in the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of the reasons people are more aware of the problems in nutrition is that they have their eyes have been opened about other areas of health and how they're not being given good information, and good information is suppressed or canceled. I mean, that you that has been going on in nutrition from since the 1920s. I've been documenting corruption in the food industry. I mean, that's the farthest back that I know it to have been occurring, of industry paying off scientists. But yeah, I mean, I think the American public is kind of ready to reckon with some of this information.
Well, the pendulum has to swing far enough to one side that it finally gets whatever obvious. It gets to be people's personal stories. Now they know somebody. I mean, when I was growing up, there was no such phrase as food allergy. I'm substantially older than Cena, but if you wanted a birthday party for 3-year-olds, the moms didn't have to spend a week before the party asking what they could have. I mean, and so it takes a while. Nature's very forgiving, fortunately, and can handle a lot of abuse, but eventually, nature bats last. The balance has to be paid, and I think that pendulum has swung to the point. I mean, what is it now? I mean, RFK Jr. points out all the time that of the 40 richest countries on the 40 quote unquote rich countries on the planet, the U.S. is at the bottom, number 40 in sickness, chronic illness data.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think that number is refers to the amount of money we spend on diet and health, on medical care versus our outcomes. Like we spend the most money per patient and have the worst
have worse
outcomes
outcomes.
of
That's
any
right.
Western nation.
Friends, want to dive deeper into our thought-provoking conversations? Become part of the Beyond Labels family today by joining below. For any gift amount, you'll get access to the full, uncut episodes.
Every contribution, whether big or small, keeps this podcast going.
So join us and expand your Beyond Labels experience. Thank you.